Hello, my mother has been working in an office for many years and I have heard about the science childhood. This story is not just hype, but a real experience that many people can relate to. I made this video so that no one feels alone and so what we don't repeat other people's mistakes. All names, companies, and others here are fictional, but emotions are real.
The second I heard, "Let's all give a warm welcome back to Brad Whitmore," my heart didn't just drop. It flatlined. I was standing in heels I'd bought specifically for what was supposed to be my promotion ceremony. Black, pointed, professional, but with just enough edge to whisper, I didn't claw my way up here to be overlooked. I had rehearsed the smile I'd give when they said my name. Not smug, not too grateful, just the kind of confident nod you earn after holding up an entire department with spit, spreadsheets, and 2 hours of sleep a night. But they never said my name. The CEO smiled like he was unveiling the second coming of Jobs. Brad smirked like a frat boy who just got handed the keys to his daddy's yacht. I stared at that stage, at the clapping hands, and I felt something shift in me. Something final. 6 years, not 6 weeks, not 6 months, 6 years. And in that time, I'd carried risk ops through everything: partner fallouts, client restructures, a full systems migration. When Brad took some time to work on himself, read, fumbled a 12-month contract, and ghosted the company, I held the line. I made sure the damn thing worked. And for what? A catered ceremony and a front row seat to my own erasure? Hey, before I go further, if you've ever put your blood, nerves, and literal health into a job only to get blindsided, do me a favor. Subscribe. Like the video. 97% of people never do, and honestly, that support keeps us going. Anyway, the risk division wasn't just something I worked on, it was mine. I wrote the protocols, built the pipelines, pitched the top 5 clients we still had. The only reason we'd even made it through Q2 last year without penalties was because I'd found a buried compliance clause that saved us $200K in breach costs. And I didn't ask for a parade. Hell, I didn't even ask for a raise, just kept my head down, kept everything moving. Because I knew the contract. I knew the clause. It was buried in year 3 after a particularly vicious legal review. I'd pushed for a just in case they screw me clause, what legal called an involuntary displacement trigger. Clause 18C. It read like a throwaway to anyone skimming, but I made sure it was airtight. If the role of division head is vacated involuntarily within 72 hours of scheduled milestone vesting, the award shall still trigger in full within 48 hours. 6 years of service. Vesting date, Friday, and today was Tuesday, the day of the ceremony. I should have seen it coming. The breadcrumbs had been there. HR ghosted my milestone confirmation email from 2 weeks ago. My regular check-in with the CEO got bumped due to travel. And Brad, with his pressed suit and smug little nod, had just strolled back into the office like he hadn't left this place a smoking crater. But I'd waited. I'd documented. I'd prepared. I knew how this worked. I didn't cry. Didn't make a scene, just stood up after the speech, walked straight to the CEO's table, and set my badge and phone down like I was laying the last piece of evidence on the table. Then I turned to Brad, looked him dead in the eyes, and said with a smile that could frost glass, "Congrats, Brad. You're gonna love my office." The envelope was already in HR's hand by the time I walked out. They didn't know it yet, but I had just handed them a legal grenade. I'm not stupid. I've been around long enough to know silence isn't just an oversight, it's a strategy. When HR doesn't respond to a direct question about a legally binding clause involving $3.6 million, they're not busy. They're stalling. They're looping in legal. They're figuring out how to not pay you. That Friday was supposed to be the payout date. The contract made it crystal clear: 6 years of continuous leadership, unbroken operational lead, and the performance numbers to match. There were no "if we feel like it" clauses. This wasn't discretionary. It was a legal milestone, tied to metrics, auditable, filed, logged. And after watching this company bend over backward to keep partners happy with half the competence I'd poured in, I knew damn well the only way to make them honor it was to trap them in their own paper trail. So 2 weeks before the ceremony, I sent a nice, clean email, neutral subject line, professional tone. Just confirming the milestone payout timing, Friday the 18th. Let me know if you need anything from me. No reply. Nothing. Not even the usual passive-aggressive, "thanks for checking in, we'll circle back" HR fluff. That's when I checked the internal calendar. My weekly 1.1 with the CEO, blocked out like clockwork every Thursday for over 4 years, was marked rescheduled. No explanation, no follow-up, just gone. I walked into the hallway later that day and ran right into Brad. He didn't even pretend to be surprised to see me, just gave me that smug little grin he's perfected since undergrad and said, "Big week coming up, huh?" Then winked. He winked. I wanted to drive a copy of the org chart into his forehead, but instead I smiled. Didn't blink, didn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, I walked back to my office and pulled out the folder I kept at the back of my filing drawer, labeled simply 18C. I had drafted it myself. Brought it to legal in year 3, back when I realized they'd never actually give me Brad's title but would lean on me for every fire he started. They tried to water it down. I said no. They said it was highly specific. I said good. We went back and forth for 2 months, but I didn't budge. And eventually, they signed. It had 2 triggers. I had to be in the division head role for 6 years without interruption. Done. If I were removed within 72 hours of the vesting date, involuntarily or otherwise, it would still trigger the bonus, automatically in full within 48 hours. Simple. Elegant. Brutal. I printed a fresh copy, highlighted the clause, dated it. Then I dug through my email archive, found every report, every quarterly milestone, every risk forecast I'd submitted under my name, especially the ones that got rerouted to Brad's email after he returned. I downloaded time-stamped versions of all of them, backed them up in 2 encrypted drives, sent one to my personal cloud, the other to my lawyer, who I'd prepped months ago, just in case the ceremony didn't go the way everyone assumed it would. I'd seen too many women passed over by men who failed upward, too many last-minute org shifts dressed up as strategic pivots. And Brad? He wasn't just a risk. He was a walking, talking demolition clause wrapped in nepotism and hair gel. So when he winked at me in that hallway, I didn't just suspect something was coming. I knew, and I was ready. The clapping started before he even finished saying Brad's name, like they were trying to drown out their own guilt with applause. I stood there, second row, surrounded by people I'd mentored, cleaned up after, and in some cases literally covered for when deals got rocky. People who had texted me, "It's your year," and "Finally justice," just days before. Now they were smiling, clapping, some even whistled. And there was Brad, soaking it up like he'd cured cancer instead of just returning from a sabbatical that looked suspiciously like rehab and sounded suspiciously like quiet legal time out. The CEO looked right through me when he announced it, didn't even flinch, like I was a forgotten coffee mug someone left in the microwave too long. "Loyalty and promise," he said. I almost laughed. Brad had the loyalty of a stray cat and the promise of a fire alarm with low batteries. I didn't blink, didn't show anything, just walked up to the front like I belonged there, because I did. I built that department with my own 2 hands, bled for it. Lost weekends, relationships, and half a gallbladder for it. I earned that role. So I walked up, past the fake grins and champagne flutes, and set my badge and company phone right on the edge of the table in front of the CEO. Loud enough to make the room pause just slightly. "Congrats, Brad," I said, just loud enough to cut through the second wave of clapping. "You're gonna love my office." He froze, just for a second. Then that sleazy grin slid back into place and he gave me the world's weakest thanks. I turned to HR. She had her little company-issued clipboard hugged to her chest like a security blanket. Didn't meet my eyes. She already knew. Not what was coming. But that something was. You don't sideline someone for 6 years, feed them promises, and expect them to just clap when the knife finally lands. I handed her the envelope. Printed on thick paper. The good stuff. Inside, my resignation, clean, undeniable, signed with the same black pen I'd used to sign off on every risk report for the past 5 quarters. Full documentation attached. She didn't open it, just nodded and said, "The decision is final." I smiled. "It is." She had no idea what else was in that envelope. None of them did. They thought this was the end. Thought I'd walk away wounded, tail between my legs, grateful for the years of opportunity. But that envelope didn't just contain my resignation. It was a loaded weapon, and the clock had already started ticking. 2 hours after I walked out of that over-catered betrayal circus, the CEO finally opened the envelope. I know this because Terry Lane, their general counsel, texted me 2 words at exactly 3:14 p.m. It started. Inside the envelope, he found exactly what I wanted him to find. No more, no less. A pristine copy of my resignation, signed and time-stamped. Attached, a copy of my employment contract with clause 18C, highlighted in yellow and circled twice in red ink like a bloody halo. 3 separate HR email threads confirming, without a shadow of a doubt, that my milestone date was Friday the 18th. They'd confirmed it not once, not twice, but 3 times. All on record, all within the last 60 days. And stapled behind it all, a delivery log showing every risk report filed under my name for the past fiscal year. 42 reports, each one tied to revenue decisions, investor confidence, and compliance triggers. All of them documented. All of them pointing to me, not Brad, not the CEO, me. At the top, just one sentence in my handwriting. You chose legacy over leadership. The clause is active. That's when the real panic started. By 4:17 p.m., Terry was locked in legal ops with 3 contract analysts, 1 outside counsel, and the VP of finance, who, up until that moment, had been smiling at the open bar, trying to flirt with someone from marketing. Now he looked like someone had poured cold cement into his bloodstream. I wasn't there to see it. Didn't need to be. I knew what that room would feel like. Silent. Heavy. The air sucked out. Like someone cracked open the vault and found a ticking bomb inside. One with a timer that started the second Brad was announced. Clause 18C wasn't just symbolic, it was enforceable. A legal landmine that only triggered under 2 conditions. 1, if I was removed from my role within 72 hours of the milestone vesting date. And 2, if the company failed to execute the payout within 48 hours of that removal, interest would start compounding. Hourly. They had activated both conditions with 1 smug announcement and a catered lunch, and they hadn't even realized it yet. Terry did. The moment she read the clause, really read it, her hands probably went cold, because she had co-signed that contract 3 years ago. She was the one who'd reviewed the final language, argued over the comma placement, tried to swap the within 48 hours clause for within a reasonable time frame. I hadn't let her, and she had finally relented. Now she was staring at her own signature. And the realization that she'd approved a clause that was about to cost the company a hell of a lot more than $3.6 million. Because unlike Brad's fake loyalty and the CEO's champagne platitudes, my clause didn't lie. And now it was alive. They scrambled so fast it was almost poetic. The very people who'd ignored my emails, cut me out of meetings, and watched me build their infrastructure while they took credit for strategic vision. Now they were flipping through contracts like their lives depended on it. And honestly, financially, maybe they did. Terry had the interns digging through archived HR files and old SharePoint folders that hadn't been opened in half a decade. I heard they even pulled my original hiring packet from the dusty archives, like they might find a typo they could weaponize. Sorry, no dice. Every clause had been reviewed, annotated, and signed in black ink. Twice. I'd made sure of that. They asked legal if Brad's return technically qualified as a structural realignment. It didn't. They asked if my title change could be viewed as a lateral move or reassignment. It wasn't. I resigned, with documentation, in writing. After being publicly passed over and replaced, they tried to say that Brad was transitioning back into leadership and I had opted out of the new structure. But the emails, the recorded meetings, even my untouched calendar invites told a very different story. You don't opt out when you're not even told there's a door. Clause 18C wasn't vague. It wasn't open to interpretation. It had teeth, and it had timestamps. Most importantly, it had intent. Intent they couldn't spin after the fact. And the worst part? Terry had co-signed it. There was her name, plain as day, next to mine. 3 years ago, she had argued with me for weeks about the interest rate wording, said the hourly compounding was aggressive. I'd said, that's the point. She rolled her eyes and called it overkill. I called it insurance. Worse than that, HR had confirmed twice that my milestone date was still active and unchanged. First in a Slack thread, then in an official internal email I'd archived with a screenshot and a forwarded copy to my lawyer. There was no amendment, no restructuring clause, no revision. They didn't kill the bonus by giving Brad my job. They triggered it, like tossing a lit match on a gasoline-soaked rug and then acting shocked when the drapes caught fire. And now the clock was ticking, loud enough that you could hear the hum of anxiety vibrating through the entire executive floor. Because per clause 18C, they had 48 hours to release full payment. And every single hour they delayed, that bonus was gaining interest. They found it too late. Friday morning, someone in finance, probably some poor second-year analyst who didn't realize he was about to become a footnote in a meltdown, finally flagged the clause. I don't know if it was in a panicked spreadsheet review or a last-ditch keyword search through contract PDFs, but the moment it surfaced, I imagine the room went dead silent. There it was, buried in the clause, clear as daylight. Failure to release milestone payment within 48 hours of involuntary role displacement results in hourly compounding at 0.5% per hour. No wiggle room, no footnotes, no vague, reasonable delays permitted. Just pure legal gravity. By the time they caught it, I was sitting on my porch, drinking coffee, watching the sun do its thing while the dollars racked up in my inbox like slot machine dings. The payout had started at $3.6 million. At 0.5% per hour, that was an extra $7,100. Every single hour. And they had burned through 44 of them already. 4 hours left. They probably thought they were being clever by fast-tracking Brad's paperwork. But in doing so, he had to sign off on my termination. And he did, with a smile, I'm sure. Labeled it transitional streamlining, like I was some outdated plugin they were disabling in the next update. That phrase, those two little words, were the nail in their financial coffin. Because transitional streamlining isn't cause. It's not misconduct. It's not dereliction or performance failure. It's cosmetic, strategic, the kind of terminology companies use when they're shuffling chairs to make room for someone with a better golf handicap. And every hour since that decision, my payout had been quietly growing, compounding, not daily, hourly. The legal team had already burned through their caffeine reserves looking for loopholes, hoping some oversight or ambiguous phrasing might get them off the hook. But I'd read the contract more times than they had. Hell, I wrote half the damn clause myself. There was no ambiguity. And here's the kicker. Brad's name was all over the paperwork. The system time-stamped his approval at 9:43 a.m. Wednesday morning. His digital signature verified and matched against his account login. Every word of my removal linked directly to him. No deniability. No way to pin it on the CEO. Brad hadn't just stolen my title. He signed the debt. And the board? They were just now realizing they'd let a frat bro in a suit light a financial grenade under the company's feet. Tick, tick, tick. 12:11 p.m. Friday, an hour and 49 minutes before the compounding interest would hit another $7,100. I got the email. Subject line, "Let's clear the air." From the CEO himself. The same man who couldn't make eye contact with me at the promotion ceremony. Now he wanted a friendly little chat. His message was thinly veiled corporate panic dressed up as diplomacy. He valued my contributions, was sorry things had unfolded in such a confusing way, and hoped we could discuss a mutually beneficial outcome. He was prepared, he said, to ensure the legacy bonus is processed swiftly if I would re-examine the confidentiality terms. Translation: "We'll pay you if you agree to keep this quiet. Sign an NDA, lock it all down, pretend it never happened. Cute." I didn't reply, didn't even blink. I just forwarded it to my attorney, who had been waiting all morning for this moment like a cat watching a birdhouse. She sent the reply. Subject: Clause 18C, enforcement in progress. One line in the body. Per the terms of Clause 18C, the payment schedule and full conditions are non-negotiable. Then she attached a revised invoice, not a threat, not a demand, just a fact. Since sunrise, the interest had climbed another $28,000. They were now looking at a total nearing $3.9 million, and the meter was still running. I could imagine him reading that email with his hands clenched so tight his wedding ring cut into his skin. I'd sat across from him enough times in tense budget meetings to know exactly what that silence looked like. The twitch in his temple, the lip pressing into itself. He wasn't used to being outmaneuvered. Definitely not by someone who used to fetch coffee for his board meetings. And now? Now he had to explain to the board why the company owed me more than the annual salary of half their leadership team combined. I didn't take the call, didn't acknowledge the olive branch, because this wasn't about feelings. This was a contract. This was clockwork, and every tick was mine. The meeting was called for 8 a.m. sharp. No croissants, no welcome coffee, just cold faces, paper-thin patience, and the kind of atmosphere you only get when money is bleeding and someone's about to get sacrificed. Strathmore's boardroom isn't flashy. It's strategic. Frosted glass, oversized table, chairs that cost more than my first car, and a wall-length display built for investor demos and ego projections. But that morning, the only thing projected was a 4-page invoice and the clause that broke them. At the front of the room stood Terry Lane, stone-faced, binder in hand. Brad sat 2 chairs down, arms crossed like a sulking teenager. He still didn't get it. Probably thought they could negotiate their way out. Probably thought confidentiality was still on the table. Meanwhile, the clause was staring them down like a loaded gun. On the screen, a detailed invoice, principal, hourly compounding interest, timestamps down to the minute. A breakdown of Clause 18C with the compounding clause highlighted in blood red, and one brutal line in bold at the bottom, enforceable and due Friday 4:27 p.m. No emotion, no commentary, just raw, clinical debt. An investor from Berlin leaned forward, squinting at the screen like it might blink first. "You didn't read the clause?" he asked, slow and sharp, with the kind of accent that makes a boardroom freeze. Brad shrugged. It wasn't flagged as a key term. The room didn't breathe. The CEO looked like he hadn't slept in days. Hair unwashed, shirt wrinkled, tie missing. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. What could he say? That he let his brother-in-law make a legal call without reading the document? That he prioritized loyalty over liability? Terry cleared her throat, loud enough to break the tension. She opened her binder, turned a page deliberately, then closed it again. "I suggest we pay her," she said flatly, "and pray she doesn't go public." Silence. The Berlin investor looked directly at the CEO. "If this leaks, we'll lose half the Series D backers." Another board member murmured, "We'd better hope she's not talking to the press." They all looked at Brad. He looked at the wall. The CEO finally spoke, voice hoarse. "Get it paid. Today." Nobody clapped. Nobody spoke. They just nodded like soldiers before a firing squad, because in that moment, they all understood something they'd refused to see for 6 years. It wasn't Brad who ran Risk Ops. It wasn't the CEO who held control. It was me, and the reins had already slipped from their hands. The wire hit my account just after noon on Wednesday. No warning, no fanfare. Just a push notification from my bank and a quiet little line that read, "Strathmore Analytics Legal Transfer Complete." The amount was exact. Principal plus interest. Every cent they'd tried to cheat me out of, multiplied by every smug hour they let that clock run. The final figure? Enough to pay off my mortgage, my sister's med school debt, and still leave enough to never answer to a meeting invite again. There was no email from the CEO, no "hope we can put this behind us" from HR, no empty lessons learned nonsense, just a one-line message from legal. Attached is confirmation of fulfillment per clause 18C. That was it. No signature, no apology, just proof they'd surrendered, and the quiet admission that they'd been outmaneuvered by the woman they'd spent 6 years pretending was invisible. A week later, Strathmore issued a bland internal memo titled Leadership, Restructure, and Strategic Alignment. I didn't need to read the whole thing. I got the forwarded PDF from 3 different people still inside. Apparently curiosity spikes when a $4 million payout leaks across an org chart. Brad, suddenly stripped of his title, was transitioning to an advisory capacity. Translation. Boxed out, benched, and politely shoved toward the exit with no seat at the grown-up table. The CEO? Refocused on strategic partnerships. Translation. The board finally pulled him off daily ops and told him to go kiss investor rings somewhere far, far away. But the part that got me? Buried at the bottom of their Q1 executive summary, tucked under liabilities and adjustments, in font so small you could miss it unless you were looking for blood. One line, no bold, no color. Payout executed per clause, 18C, No mention of my name, no context, just the clause, like it had reached up from the depths of their own negligence and carved its initials into their legacy. I didn't reply to the email, didn't make a statement, didn't post on LinkedIn or tweet some passive-aggressive nonsense about knowing your worth. I just screenshotted the transfer confirmation, saved it to a folder called Closure, and went back to sipping my tea. I never raised my voice, never played dirty, never even asked for what wasn't already in writing. They underestimated me. So I let the clause speak louder than I ever needed to.